I'm probably about 2 years into product management, and I guess made my way into it through self-learning and courses and opportunities at work, and then sort of found the first role and then subsequent roles. But I haven't had many conversations about failure. It all feels like it can go up and up and up and up. Like you can read the next article and the next article and you can be super successful. So I just want to speak to the people in the room that, well, I want to speak to everyone, but I want to speak to the people who are considering a career in product management, no matter how you move into it or follow into it, about those kind of early failures and how to, I guess, quantify your value or think about your value. Tonight I'll just tell you a story about how I started and where I've fallen and how I've managed to maintain motivation to move forward. I feel like this is a great image that I found on the internet. So if you fail, never give up, because FAIL means first attempt in learning. End is not the end. In fact, END means effort never dies. If you get no as an answer, remember, no means next opportunity. So I started life after my master's, which was in innovation design engineering, so I have a sort of like a product and innovation background. I started life as a courseware developer. So whilst I was a courseware developer, so that involved putting together documentation and training material for an analytics product. I was certain that I didn't want to do product design anymore, because I think I'd gotten to the point where I was quite tired of seeing, or maybe not knowing what happened to concepts that I handed over to clients, like what happened to them sort of 3 years down the line or 5 years down the line, and not really having much control of that. So I knew that I wanted to do something. I just thought it might be in the way of tech. Don't have a tech background, so started there. Unbeknownst to me, I was sat next to a product manager, and that kind of, I guess, decided my fate for me. So then my first real role was at a startup, choosing not to name, but I was a product manager for a learning management system, and then that was sort of like a short-term contract, and then my next role was a short-term contract as a product manager on a mobile payments product. And then I'm now a product manager, a digital product manager doing digital consultancy for an architectural and built environment consultancy. So when I say I sort of found out about product management, so yes, so I was sat next to a product manager, and if I'm really, really honest, I thought that he didn't do any work. Like, it just seemed like the guy got up and he went to talk to different people all day, and he'd come to me and he'd give me work to do, but he'd get to his desk with a coffee, he made fancy coffee, and he didn't really do any work. So I decided to dig in and find out what was going on, and it seemed like he was a plate spinner for the product, and I found that quite enticing. So where it looked like he could make decisions and speak multiple languages to different teams, I just thought it was amazing. So I was pulled onto a few different projects with him. It was useful for me to bring in sort of like the UX and sort of product design, I guess, skills that I'd brought from the past, and it gelled really well. I then thought it'd be great to treat my learning material, I guess, like a product. I had access to a learning management system, and I onboarded clients, and I could see who accessed my learning material when. Did a bit of digging with the sales department to understand why most of the time only about 10% of people actually opened my courses or viewed my documentation, and found that it was the way in which teams in I guess our B2B, our other businesses, learnt about the product. It was more classroom-based than individual-based, so I was able to make changes to the courseware and save the department about 1/3 of the cost and 1/3 of the time for producing it. So I was able to demonstrate value, and so I asked whether or not, maybe that they considered making me into a product manager. And it was like a massive no. And it was no without a reason. And I sort of thought, this feels really strange. I feel as though I've geared up to this. Like, it was super, super painful. But at the same time, my motivation felt quite high. And I thought, because I could demonstrate value, that I'd grown a little bit in confidence enough to know maybe PM there wasn't right for me. So I think I picked up that for some people it's easy, but for me it seemed to be tricky to slide into a product management role at that company, possibly because I was seen to be doing something well. And I was a one-man band, so there wouldn't have been anyone to pick up my workload. That could have been why. And also the organisational shape, so it was like an upside-down triangle. So training and movement didn't typically happen often. So I stayed on, and I'd say it took me about 4 months to find another role. So I just sort of focused a bit more. I focused my job search on my areas of expertise. So because I knew there was a good shot at finding a product management role, because everything's so varied, the definition of product management is so wide. I focused on my skills within learning and development, and also my innovation design background. And advice from recruiters seemed to be to find a role outside of London that's a full product management role with a very, very low salary attached to that. So I don't know if anyone here has been offered that sort of advice before. Okay, somebody's nodding. That's good, yes. Well, it seemed to work for me, so I landed my first role. So this was at a startup, and it was a product manager for a learning management system, so it just worked really well. That I obviously been someone who'd worked quite heavily in it, been a domain expert. This one was super cool because it had a social twist. We were a team of about 20 people. Came in, they hadn't had a product manager before. For that product, it was quite mature. I was applying everything I knew from product management for dummies, like onto it, and asking for help at the same time, being very open that I was like quite green, I wasn't hiding the fact. So I suppose like on the up, I was understanding product functionality, I was engaging with customers, which was awesome. I was liaising with my team, so I had like a senior developer and 2 junior developers, and there were sort of other mini products and a few other product managers. There were dogs, it was great. At its peak, I was scoping out new features with my team, doing competitor analysis, running workshops with my team, but also with clients, and really felt like I was carving out the role on the product. Then there were other things. So on the down, I was constantly looking for support, and I kind of wonder, whilst I feel like I got a lot out of the startup experience because it wasn't a very big startup, a lot of like my product questions went unanswered, or I'd need to reference other things before coming back. I got a mentor from the business, and then also a mentor from LinkedIn, which I'll talk about in a bit, which helped me and sort of bolstered me for a while. I started to become aware of various dynamics within my team and within sort of like my leadership team as well. And I'd say for the full 5 months, I struggled to take ownership of the product, and the best way I can describe it was that that main product was the baby of a lot of people. Does that make any sense? So it was the baby of the CEO team, it was the baby of the guy that built it from scratch, and I struggled, I really, really struggled, yeah. And I was maybe feeling a bit of resistance to new ways of working, so wanting to run something like just a stand-up in the morning felt quite difficult, and I didn't really have any avenues to express concern within the business. And then one day after Christmas, I was told, really sorry, we effed up with the hiring. We should have hired someone with 10 years of experience. And then shortly after they did. But I was absolutely devastated. So this is sometimes how I still feel about it. I just was really, really super confused. I felt like I didn't hide the fact that I didn't have any PM experience, and I didn't know who to talk to or how to talk about it. From going from such an up and knowing I was leaving my previous company, being like, haha, you don't want me as a PM, but I found my place, through to I've suddenly, like, this isn't working out anymore after 5 months, was extremely painful. So on the car ride to the station, I had one of my colleagues drove me to the station. I was ugly crying like him. And then all of a sudden she just said one thing, really, really bluntly. She was like, it'll be okay. And then suddenly I just remembered that, oh yeah, I still feel really motivated. Like, I'm hurting like hell, but I think it'll be okay. So the rest of that week, I gave myself a week to grieve. I didn't feel any pain. I just numbed myself out with food, and I think The Handmaid's Tale had just come out, so I was just watching that. And I just noticed in the background my motivation was still there. And because I was ruminating so much, and I guess the thing that got me was that my outputs could be seen, and they were tangible. There were effects that I had had on the product and the team that I know I could see, like I hadn't gaslit myself. So I held on to that because I didn't know quite how to process feeling as though I'd done some work and I'm still unemployed, or I'm just unemployed. The only thing I could think of was that maybe the CEO was just tasked with growth objectives at the time. This person with 10 years experience was what they truly wanted. And it was really down to me to take ownership of my story now. And also lean into my mentors. But it does make me think, and I've had conversations with colleagues recently, about the effort that you might put into something as a product person. I guess in scenarios where the output is intangible, and I would love to hear maybe now or afterwards any of your stories about that, because I feel like outside of product, that's something that we can all relate to. So I fully expect that that experience might happen to me again. But in some way, I have to find a way to measure or quantify value. Yes, so at that point, it was up to me to take ownership of my story and to lean into my mentors. So my mentors were wonderful because the first one I spoke to, sort of picked the phone up crying, just said, it's happened to me before. Next person I spoke to, that shit happens all the time, you just move on. The next one was like, next. And then someone was like, I wanted to warn you, which was a bit strange. And then they were like, when it happened to me, I was devastated, took some time out, and I started my own thing. Someone else was like, I took a risk for a top position, it was pushed out, it hurts, and probably the most impact was like, how will you reframe this? So this emphasis on ownership of my story started with gratitude and appreciation. So I had to first just be so thankful that I landed that first role, because I did feel that I could get a product role. I am confident today that it is the right space for me. And for everything that I experienced at that startup, it's been the most growing experience. I had the most hands-on experience. of working with certain types of people, of engaging with clients, and it was just fantastic. Yes, so I reflected on what I loved about it, and I reflected on what I chose to believe. So I didn't let my mind wander too much. But I also chose, so I chose what I wanted to think about, what I wanted to improve and work on, and I drew a line under the experience. It was a short-term role that grew me. So once I did that, the numbness went away and the pain kicked in, but my motivation was still really high. And because I could quantify my growth, and I knew that I had impact even before the startup, I could sense my value. Oh, sorry, what's that? Okay, cool. Yeah, so I could see just how much I had picked up from difficulties. I felt like my story was solid, and I was sure of myself and my motivations. My mentors were available, and I was putting in more time and effort into self-care. So something I'll recommend, I've noticed that you're all male, more or less, if you're women, but something called the Young Women's Trust. They offer career advice for women looking for new roles and sort of jobs and stuff like that. They do sort of like 6 sessions of like career counselling, if you like. That was super helpful. And then something that I recommend to absolutely everyone, if you don't already know about it, is LinkedIn has this careers advice service. So if you go onto your homepage, you click on the careers advice hub, you flick a switch, you choose the areas that you'd like mentorship in, and every 1 week or 2 weeks it recommends 6 or 7 people to connect to talk about absolutely anything. So the scope of things from business to through to hobbies is amazing. Recently recommended it to a friend who's trying to find a way to break into senior leadership. So I've constantly maintained about sort of like 5 mentors from LinkedIn, and these are people who are willing to talk to you. And I've never met any of them, but it could go from one phone call to about 10 phone calls, but it's up to you.
Is this a paid service?
Oh no, it's free. It's free. Yeah, it's free. I don't work for LinkedIn or anything, but I just it's been amazing. So, okay, so I'm just going to be really honest. Like after that experience, it took me 8 months to get another job, and I had 70 to 80 interviews, and that includes multiple rounds and the time which you wait in between. Pain had subsided, motivation was still high, growth, primarily because I used every interview as an opportunity to articulate the type of product manager I wanted to be. So I went to interviews for more technical roles, ones that were looking for more UX people, ones that were looking for businessy people, and I grew in confidence. I understood the kinds of questions that the hiring managers were asking me, and I read up after every interview, and I just felt like I grew. I'd say that something that you might want to try when you're next searching for a new role, or even in your organization at the moment, is to ask them about failure. So I kind of found that there were maybe, in an interview situation, there were about 1/3 of people who dodged the question, when have you faced failure as a product manager? They dodged the question. I had one person tell me they weren't sure what it was, how it related to the role or to my application. Some people would answer it, but it would be quite uncomfortable afterwards. And then you had 1/3 of people, I think, that truly just embraced it, and they were like, yeah, and this is how you move through, and you create small feedback loops, and you learn, and you lose the company lots of money, but it's absolutely okay. So I started doing that in interviewing, and then I just also enjoyed dressing up, because there's nothing like putting on a nice iron shirt and going to an interview with the hope that you're going to get a new job. Yeah, so I got a new job. So I got a job at Mastercard. And I guess it felt like a new era, and I became quite reflective of the old experience, and I came to the conclusion that when people sort of don't value, or an environment or culture doesn't value you, just believe them, and when they do value, you have to learn to believe them as well. So I felt like a dog from the Battersea Dogs Home or something. Like I felt really, really scared when I got to Mastercard. I felt as though at any moment I could absolutely just kind of lose my job. But I had an amazing, amazing manager. And the more work he gave me, the more I did. But I'd probably say, try not to, if this ever happens to you, try not to overwork, to kind of prove your worth. Give yourself time to adjust and find a middle ground. So I've got like a crazy long list of tips for interviewing, and I've sort of posed this as if I could look back and talk to myself at the time and prep myself for interviewing before I landed that first role. It would be to get plenty of mentors on board of lots of different varieties. Asking questions at interviews also about how the role differs from the spec. So I don't know if you've noticed this, I'd maybe be surprised if you guys haven't, but a lot of the times in that 70 to 80 interview period, I was getting to points where I'd be told about a job from a recruiter. I'd read the spec and they'd be like, oh no, don't pay attention to like the last half of that. I'd show up in the interview and it was again, the hiring manager was telling me about responsibilities from the role that were completely different. And then I'd mentioned something from like my past which wasn't listed at all, but they felt was maybe relevant for the role. So it was really confusing. But I would just pay attention to that. I don't know if that would have any impact on the type of culture or environment you go into, but I can remember from that first role that the spec seemed sort of out with what I heard at the interview. Listen out for whether or not they ask you product management related questions, which is another really odd one. Of course, it's great to kind of find out who a person is at interview, but listen into how much they seem to understand about the role themselves and how they pose what it is you'll be doing. Ask about their expectations and view of success. Ask how long they've been looking. If they've been looking for about a year, I'd suggest giving them a bit of a grilling and just making sure they understand what it is you're bringing and what their expectations, everyone's expectations. Ask about team dynamics. And if you hear any red flags, absolutely listen to them. I think I can remember from that first interview being told that so-and-so's a bit difficult, but if you come to us and tell him to just effing do it, he will do it. So, red flag. Yes, and then again, ask about failure and see what happens. And advice to myself in starting a new role. I now do like high-level pestle analysis, so political, economic, social, what does the T stand for again? Technical, environmental and legal. Just a light analysis of the culture and different teams, just to gauge, what's going on, how do people communicate with each other, who's the real decision maker in the business, whether it's small or whether it's quite large. I've learned to have the courage of my convictions, and to also, a mentor told me to do this, but to continuously apply for roles, whether or not it feels like you're comfortable or not. I think agree on what you own and take hold of that. Again, links to having the courage of your convictions. And as I mentioned before, don't overwork to prove yourself. I sometimes have a really bad habit of coming in at 8 and leaving at 9. I'm not sure why, but I've had to kill that, especially in the last role. Constantly take inventory of your skills that you can introduce from a previous life. That includes keeping a list of your achievements and kind of who compliments you. I don't know if any of you have appraisals, but I feel as though if I'd kept notes of my working relationships in that startup as some sort of evidence, I don't know that that would have kept me there, but I think it would have been really valuable afterwards. Yes, monitor your value and your confidence. I think that you can define that. And then, yes, just take note of what you're willing to do slowly to get to where you want to be. And then again, absolutely seek mentorship. So yes, so I've learned that failure isn't static. In the wrong environment, it's rejected and brushed to one side. But I think in a healthy environment, it's embraced and propels you forward. And then I just picked up an article the other day of, this is just an example of how my current company, Arab, deal with failure. So we'll publish like articles internally. So this was just a story about, so we're going through digital transformation like most companies. And we're turning a lot of sort of like, we're turning things into digital tools and pumping lots of money into them, and some things are dying. So this guy just very openly sort of talked about the highs and lows of having to retire his product. After a year, which was an automated aircraft noise cancellation tool, he felt it received too much funding and didn't follow an innovation methodology. And also in that article, he goes on to say that they had the wrong type of customer segmentation, and also they weren't charging enough. And at my company, there's just a really big emphasis on validating your ideas earlier and failing faster. So yeah, so if you, depending on what sort of cultures and environments that you're in at the moment, it's worth just assessing how they deal with failure, who you can talk to about it, how to quantify it, which I'm still kind of learning about, and also how to quantify successes, how you measure successes. And that's the end of my talk.